The order was simple. Bring out the stallion, the one no one touched, the one the late Queen rode alone when the world got too loud. And when Queen Camilla mounted him, smiling for the cameras, no one dared speak. No one, except the guard. Because the moment that old horse stumbled and the silence turned to strain, he stepped forward and stood in her way. Now, before we show you what happened next inside that Windsor stable, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, tap subscribe with the bell icon turned on, and stay right here. Because what she called tradition, the guard called cruelty. He heard the engine first, not the usual morning delivery van or the groundskeeper's Land Rover, something heavier. The kind of motorcade that didn't announce itself, but made you straighten your collar anyway. Sergeant Lionel Harth was checking the duty roster outside Stable 4 when the fog rolled in, thick across Windsor's inner riding court. 7:15. No horses schedule, no exercise rotations, just maintenance and feed checks. But the Queen Consort's Range Rover doesn't show up for maintenance. Lionel set the clipboard down and walked toward the sound. His boots scraped against the frost-damp stone, each step deliberate. 15 years Coldstream Guard. 12 of those here. He knew which stalls stayed locked, which protocols got bent, and which ones never did. Stable 4 hadn't been opened since the funeral. Inside, High Sovereign, the Queen's last ceremonial stallion, shifted quietly in his enclosure. Nearly 20 years old now, silver creeping up his muzzle. The kind of horse that doesn't respond to whistles anymore, but still turns his head when you say his name soft enough. Lionel paused at the threshold. The brass plate, bolted beneath the lantern hook, caught the early light. Preservation order. Ceremonial rest only. No further mounting by royal decree. ER double star. That plate had been there since September. No one had touched it. No clearance had overwritten it. And yet here came the equerry, half jogging across the gravel, breath fogging, eyes wide like he'd been sent to deliver news no one wanted to hear. Sergeant Harth! The man stopped just short of the stable door, one hand on the frame. You're to ready, High Sovereign, immediately. Her Majesty wishes to ride him this morning. Lionel didn't answer right away. He looked past the equerry, toward the motorcade, where 2 aides were already unloading tack from the rear compartment. One held a saddlebag. The other carried a folded riding blanket pressed tight against his chest like evidence, his gut clenched. Not in fear, in recognition. Something was already wrong. And no one had asked him first. Now, before we show you what happened when the Queen Consort tried to mount a horse that hadn't been ridden in nearly a year, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Because this wasn't about tradition, it was about memory. And the guard who refused to let it be ridden over. Lionel walked straight to the logbook room. It sat tucked behind the main stable office. Low ceiling, walls lined with filing cabinets that still used actual keys. He punched in the access code and stepped inside, the smell of leather oil and old paper hitting him immediately. He went straight to the master ledger. Red cloth binding, gold embossed crest on the cover. He flipped to the transfer and movement section, running his finger down the entries. Nothing. No authorization for sovereign's removal. No veterinary clearance. No signed order from the master of the horse. Just blank space where there should have been documentation. He checked the daily activity log next. Scanned backward through 3 weeks of entries. Feed checks, hoof trimming, blanket rotation. All routine, but no notation of an upcoming ride. No advance warning that the Queen Consort had requested him. That's when he saw it. Tucked into the back of the ledger, a loose sheet of paper. Cream-coloured stationery. Handwritten note dated 2 weeks prior. Inquired availability of HM ceremonial mounts for personal use. Advised preservation status. Request noted but not approved. Equerry office asterisk. Someone had asked, been told no, and decided to proceed anyway. Lionel pulled his phone from his jacket and scrolled to a number he hadn't called in months. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Denham, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Denham, retired Master of the Horse under Queen Elizabeth. 73 years old now, living in a cottage near Balmoral, but still on the advisory board for ceremonial protocols. Sir, it's Hearth. Windsor detail. A pause. Then, what's happened? Queen consorts attempting to mount High Sovereign. No clearance, no vet approval. I've got aides in the yard right now pulling tack. Denham exhaled slowly. Elizabeth gave verbal instruction the day before she passed. Told me directly. Sovereign stays where he is. No parades, no shows. He's earned his rest. Princess Anne was there. She heard it too. Lionel's jaw tightened. Nothing's in writing. Didn't need to be, Denham said quietly. Some orders are given once. They don't expire just because the person who gave them does. If I refuse, you'll be doing your job, Denham interrupted. That horse carried her through 53 years of service. He's not transport. He's not spectacle. And he's damn well not a privilege for someone who thinks legacy comes with the title. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Denham added, softer, do what's right, son. I'll back you if it comes to that. Lionel ended the call and locked the logbook cabinet. He slid the loose note into his inside pocket, not to hide it, but to preserve it. Then he walked back out into the yard. The aides were already at Sovereign's stall, and Camilla was crossing the archway. She came through the archway like she'd done it 100 times before. No hesitation, no introduction, just the sharp click of riding boots on stone and the rustle of her tailored coat catching the morning breeze. Queen Camilla crossed into the stable yard with 2 aides trailing close behind, one holding a bridle, the other fumbling with a leather girth strap that kept slipping from his hands. Sergeant Lionel Hearth stood near the tack wall, one gloved hand resting on the latch to stable 4. He didn't salute, didn't step aside, just stayed exactly where procedure said he should be when someone approached a restricted enclosure without prior clearance. Camilla stopped a few feet away and pulled her gloves off, one finger at a time. Her tone was pleasant, efficient, the kind of voice used in meetings where decisions have already been made. He's been idle too long, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the stall. It's cruel, really, keeping him locked away like some kind of relic. No creature likes to be forgotten. Lionel heard the words, registered them, but what landed harder was what she didn't say. That she'd already decided, that the tack was already out, that someone had signed off on this without telling him. He kept his voice level. Ma'am, High Sovereign was declared ceremonial after Her Majesty's passing. His last veterinary assessment marked him unfit for live mount. He hasn't been saddled since the Jubilee. Camilla's smile didn't falter. Then consider this therapeutic. A short ride, nothing strenuous. Behind her, one of the aides had already begun unlatching the hooks on the tack wall. Metal scraped softly. Leather creaked. Lionel didn't raise his voice. Ma'am, he's under preservation order. There's no clearance logged for his removal. That got her attention. She turned fully now, coat flaring slightly, eyes narrowing just enough to show she wasn't asking any more. Sergeant, she said, voice still calm but colder, do you intend to argue with your queen? Lionel held her gaze, not defiant, not submissive, just steady. No, ma'am, he said quietly, only with an order that might harm a loyal subject. The air in the courtyard changed, not loudly, not dramatically, just shifted, like someone had opened a door no one knew was there. One of the grooms near the water trough glanced over, then looked away fast. Another pretended to check a feed bucket. The aide with the bridle stopped moving entirely. Camilla's jaw tightened. She turned slightly to the aide nearest her and said, without breaking eye contact with Lionel, "Tack him." The command landed like a stone in still water. Lionel didn't move, but his hand lowered slowly to rest on the edge of the stable door, not blocking it, not yet, just there. Behind him, he could hear Sovereign shift in his stall, a soft snort, the scrape of a hoof against straw. The horse already knew something was wrong. The saddle went on too fast. Lionel could see it from where he stood. The way the aide yanked the girth strap tight without checking the placement, the way the blanket sat crooked across Sovereign's withers. One of the younger grooms reached for the bit, but his hands were shaking. He fumbled it twice before getting it near the stallion's mouth. Sovereign tossed his head. Not aggressive, just resistant. The horse hadn't worn tack in 11 months. His muscle memory was gone, his trust was fragile, and no one in that yard was moving like they understood that. Lionel had seen this before, years ago. Different horse, different rider. A visiting dignitary who'd insisted on mounting one of the retired ceremonial geldings for a photo opportunity. The horse had seemed fine at first, stood still, accepted the saddle, didn't fuss, but the moment weight hit his back, something in him broke, not physically, mentally. He'd reared so violently, he'd torn the bridle clean off, took 3 handlers to calm him. The horse never recovered, had to be retired permanently to pasture. Lionel had sworn then he'd never let it happen again. He stepped forward as Camilla approached Sovereign with the reins gathered in her left hand. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd ridden 100 horses before and expected this one to be no different. "Ma'am," Lionel said, louder now, "I need to formally log my objection. This mount is not cleared for—" "Your objection is noted," Camilla said without looking at him, "and overruled." She didn't ask anyone to hold him steady, didn't wait for a mounting block, just put her left boot in the stirrup, grabbed the pommel, and swung her leg over. Sovereign flinched. It was subtle, just a slight shift of weight, a tensing through his back legs. But Lionel saw it. So did one of the grooms, who took an instinctive step forward before stopping himself. Camilla settled into the saddle, adjusted her seat, and gathered the reins. "Easy now," she murmured, like the words alone would calm him. They didn't. Sovereign's ears pinned back. His head jerked once, testing the bit. Foam began to collect at the corners of his mouth, not from exertion, but from stress. His breathing changed. Shorter, shallower. Lionel moved closer. Not running, not shouting, just closing the distance with slow, measured steps. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "he's not steady. He hasn't been mounted in nearly a year. His joints—" "He'll remember," Camilla said, cutting him off. Her tone was dismissive but not cruel, just certain. She nudged her heels into Sovereign's flanks. The horse jolted forward. Not a smooth start, not a trained response, a jolt, like he'd been startled awake. His hooves scrambled against the damp cobblestone, rear legs sliding slightly before finding purchase. One of the stable hands gasped. Another took a step back. Camilla gripped tighter, pulling the reins left to correct him. "Back. Easy, lad. Back." But the words meant nothing. Not in her voice, not with her hands. Sovereign surged forward again, this time faster. His gait was uneven, confused. He wasn't resisting her. He just didn't understand her. And that was worse. Lionel's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, dismount. He's not responding." One of the grooms reached for the bit from the side, but Lionel raised a hand sharply. "No sudden grabs." Camilla gave another nudge, firmer this time, like she was trying to assert control. Sovereign's front hooves struck sparks against the stone. His neck arched wrong. His entire frame shuddered. And then his front right leg buckled, just for a second. Just enough. Camilla swayed in the saddle, hands yanking hard on the reins to steady herself. Lionel stepped forward, voice no longer polite. "Enough." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. Sovereign stopped, chest heaving, head lowered, not because he'd been commanded, because he was exhausted, and everyone in that courtyard knew it. She didn't listen, even with the warnings hanging in the air like smoke. Even with Sovereign's legs trembling beneath her, Camilla clicked her tongue twice and gave a sharp nudge with her heels. The stallion lurched forward. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't graceful. It was the movement of an animal who'd been jolted out of stillness with no rhythm to guide him. His back hooves scraped hard against the wet cobblestone, tail snapping behind him, ears pinned flat. Camilla clung to the reins, knuckles white, her voice rising slightly. "Good lad, go on, steady now, whoo." But the words didn't land. They just floated uselessly into the cold morning air, while Sovereign surged ahead, his gait uneven and confused. He wasn't galloping, he was scrambling, trying to obey something he didn't understand. His front right hoof hit a damp patch near the iron trough, slipped. His weight shifted wrong, neck twisted sharply to correct balance. Foam flew from his mouth onto the stones. One of the aides shouted something. Lionel couldn't make out the words over the clatter of hooves, but it didn't matter. He was already moving, boots pounding across the courtyard, one hand instinctively brushing the hilt of his sabre to keep it steady as he sprinted toward the paddock gate. Sovereign veered hard left, nearly clipping the corner of a feed cart. A groom dove out of the way. Another dropped the bucket he was holding, water splashing across the ground. Camilla yanked the reins. Too hard, too late. The horse's head jerked back, but his body kept moving forward. His hooves struck metal, rang out like a bell. And then he reared, not a full stand, just a panicked half lift that collapsed almost immediately. His front legs slammed back down hard, knees buckling slightly before locking again. Camilla jolted forward, grabbing the pommel with both hands, her crop falling from her grip and clattering onto the stone. Sovereign stopped, but not because he'd been commanded, because he couldn't any more. His chest heaved, flanks pulsing, foam dripping from the bit, mixing with saliva that hung in long strings from his mouth. His rear left leg buckled once, just slightly, before he corrected with a stagger. Lionel was there in seconds. Not yelling, not saluting, just stepping in front of the horse's head, slow and measured, one gloved hand raised. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're all right. It's over." Sovereign's head dropped instinctively toward Lionel's shoulder. His breath came in short, uneven bursts. Camilla sat frozen in the saddle, her face flushed, chest rising and falling hard. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, maybe an order, maybe a justification. But nothing came out. Lionel didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the horse, his voice low and steady. "He's finished, ma'am. He doesn't understand you, and you don't know him." It wasn't said with malice. It wasn't even said with anger. It was just the truth. And around them, the entire courtyard had gone still. Grooms, aides, stable hands, all frozen in place, as if no one dared move until the weight of what had just happened finished sinking through the stone. She dismounted hard. Camilla's right boot scraped against the stirrup, her coat catching briefly on the saddle horn as she swung her leg down. She landed heavier than she meant to, the thud of her heel sharp against the wet cobblestone, and let go of the reins with a dismissive flick toward the nearest groom. "He's fine," she said, voice clipped, breathing still uneven. "You're overreacting." No one moved to take the reins. The stallion stood trembling, head still pressed faintly against Sergeant Lionel Harth's shoulder. His rear left leg shook. Foam still clung to the bit. Lionel didn't turn. He stayed exactly where he was, body squared between the queen consort and the horse, like he'd stepped into a space that didn't belong to either of them. "He's shaking," Lionel said simply. Camilla's eyes flashed. "He's a creature, not a relic." Lionel's reply came without hesitation. Exactly why he shouldn't be used as one. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They just cut clean through the yard and landed somewhere in the silence, where every valet, groom and guard was now pretending to look at anything but her. Camilla stepped closer, boots clicking softly on the stone. Her coat trailed behind her like a shadow. "You presume too much, Sergeant." Lionel didn't answer. His hand remained on Sovereign's muzzle, thumb stroking gently behind the ear. The way he'd done it 100 times before, when the Queen was still alive, when this horse still had meaning carved into every step. "He's old," Lionel said quietly. "He was retired for a reason." The last time he wore that tack was at the Jubilee. His pulse was unstable then. Camilla crossed her arms. "And you're his veterinarian now?" "I'm his guard." He said it like that. Not yours, not hers, just his. A stable hand shifted his weight nearby, as if expecting someone, anyone, to step in. Camilla's jaw tightened. She turned her head slightly toward one of the aides behind her, the one holding the radio clipped to his belt. "Call security," she said coolly. "On him." The words hit the cobblestones like sleet. The aide froze. His hand hovered near his jacket, fingers brushing the radio but not lifting it. He glanced toward Lionel, then toward the horse, then at nothing in particular. The stable went dead silent. Only the sound of Sovereign's breathing, shallow, uneven, filled the void. Lionel still hadn't shifted his stance. He stood like a fixed post, gloved hand resting gently at the stallion's cheek, eyes forward. He wasn't defying her. He was protecting something older than her title. And it was that difference, quiet, visible, immovable, that made her order feel smaller by the second. Then came the sound no one had expected, a soft, wavering exhale. Not from any of them, from the horse. Sovereign let out a long breath and shifted slightly, one hind leg stretching out and quivering before he pulled it back under. His head leaned harder against Lionel's shoulder now, eyes half-lidded, the way an old soul does when it's had enough. King Charles had seen it from the archway. He didn't announce himself, no equerry, no aid, just one polished black shoe tapping once against the cobblestone as he stepped from shadow into daylight. The rain had stopped. The sky hadn't cleared, but something else had. "Sergeant Hearth!" His voice wasn't loud, wasn't whispered, but it cut clean through the courtyard like someone had rung a bell. Lionel stiffened. "Your Majesty!" Charles walked until he stood beside Lionel and the stallion. Not beside Camilla, not near the aides, just slightly behind the guard, as if the alignment had already been decided. He didn't look at Camilla when he spoke. "How many steps did she take?" Lionel kept his hand on Sovereign's neck. "Roughly 20 paces, sire." Hard gallop. His back legs slipped on the flagstone near the trough. Charles nodded once, then with a gentleness that surprised half the people watching, he reached out and touched the stallion's neck. Just a flat palm. Nothing more. The horse flinched, only slightly, but enough. Camilla's voice rose from behind them. "He's a horse, Charles, not a crystal sculpture." King Charles turned his head. "I didn't ask you," he said. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even angry. It was just final. That single sentence made more people lower their eyes than any order could have. Charles shifted his stance, fingers now brushing along Sovereign's withers. The stallion's breathing had steadied slightly, but his legs still trembled. "This horse," the king said quietly, "carried my mother through 6 coronations, 3 jubilees, and nearly half the Commonwealth's military parades. His joints are calcified, his nerves are frayed, and yet you mounted him for pleasure. Why?" Camilla straightened, drawing her coat tighter around herself. "I wasn't galloping for pleasure. I was—" "For what?" Charles said, eyes locking with hers now. "Symbolism? Tradition?" She hesitated. "Yes." Charles exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle again like frost. "Do you know what tradition actually is?" Camilla didn't reply. "Tradition is memory," he said, "and memory is not yours to break." The courtyard went still. Even the grooms stopped shifting their feet. Charles placed his hand on Lionel's shoulder, not a ceremonial gesture, just a hand. Steady. "Remove the saddle," he said. "Bring him back to the Jubilee Yard." Lionel gave a sharp nod. "Yes, Your Majesty." "And if there's any residual tremor in his hind limbs, notify Dr. Bell directly." "Understood." Charles turned to Camilla now, his voice no louder than before, but colder. "You've embarrassed the saddle, the steed, and yourself." Camilla took a breath, but no words came out. Charles wasn't done. "If I find you've given an order to override my custodial directive regarding any of my mother's horses again," he said, "I will not speak about it next time. I will act." And just like that, he turned. The edge of his coat trailed behind him as he walked back under the arch, disappearing into the corridor that led to the private wing. No fanfare, no explanation, just restoration. The saddle straps came off in silence. Sergeant Lionel Hearth worked with methodical hands, not rushed, not theatrical. He unbuckled the girth slowly, letting the leather slide free without jerking. The bridle came off next, reins slipping between his gloved fingers before he folded them neatly across his forearm. Sovereign stood still, ears angled slightly back. Not in fear, just exhaustion. Lionel didn't speak to the grooms. He didn't need to. They knew. One of them, an older stableman with silver at his temples and a limp from an old riding injury, held open the ornate side gate to the south yard, not the main stables. That would have made Sovereign walk through the front courtyard again, past the aides and the motorcade, and the eyes of everyone who'd just watched him nearly collapse. This path was quieter, paved in rubber-lined flagstones, designed for recovery. The Queen's ceremonial mount walked slow. Every step landed with weight. Lionel walked beside him, hand lightly on the halter, the empty saddle tucked beneath his arm. One of the younger grooms tried to take it. Lionel refused with a slight shake of his head. His silence wasn't protest, it was protection. Behind them, Camilla still stood near the dismount box, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, like she was trying to decipher what had just occurred. The aides didn't move. It was as if everyone had silently agreed. The distance between her and the horse would not be closed again. As they entered the Jubilee Yard, the scent hit Lionel first. Hay, liniment, cool morning wood smoke from somewhere beyond the hedgerows. It was faint, but preserved, not overwhelming. The yard had once held half a dozen ceremonial steeds, now it held only one. Sovereign. A brass plaque on the far wall bore the Queen's crest, and a small engraved line beneath it. High Sovereign, Royal Service, 1968 to 2022. Lionel guided him to the centre ring. The stallion stopped and looked around, ears twitching, like he was remembering something. His nostrils flared once, then again. And then, to everyone's quiet astonishment, the horse nickered. Not distressed, not asking, just acknowledging. Lionel stepped back and gave a low whistle, the kind used only during quiet drills or final inspections. Sovereign turned once in a slow half-circle and stood facing the Queen's plaque. That's when the silence changed. It wasn't reverent anymore. It was mournful, like the building itself had remembered. King Charles appeared at the edge of the arch, hands clasped behind his back. He didn't step in. He just stood and watched. Then, quietly, he remembers more than we do. Lionel gave a short nod. He always did. There was no need for further instruction. Lionel placed the saddle carefully on the storage rail, unclasped the girth, and wiped the fleece clean with a cloth before locking the tack away in the cabinet marked ceremonial use only, retired. Then he returned to Sovereign, pressing one hand gently to the stallion's neck. "You're home," he said. He didn't expect a response, but the horse exhaled again, this time steadier, calmer. The grooms backed away without a word. No commands, no bows, just the door quietly closing behind them, sealing the yard. And Sovereign stood alone beneath the Queen's crest. No rider, no burden, no more pain. The rain had started again, soft, barely more than mist. What remained were puddles scattered across the stone like forgotten questions. Sergeant Lionel Harth returned through the side corridor of the Windsor stables, gloves tucked under one arm, boots damp with sand and straw. His uniform bore traces of the morning, a scuff along one shin, dust on the white belt, the faint scent of saddle oil on his cuffs. None of it was out of place. None of it required explanation. Near the archway that led back to the public courtyard, the palace car was still waiting, engine running, exhaust curling into the cold air. Queen Camilla stood beside it, hands tight around her handbag. One of her heels tapped the wet stone unconsciously, like she was still trying to turn the clock backwards. The driver was inside. The aides had already loaded the tack into the rear compartment, but no one had signalled her in. When she saw Lionel approach, her spine stiffened. "I hope," she said slowly, "you understand the consequences of what you've done." Lionel didn't answer. He just stopped a few paces away, hands clasped behind his back, posture straight. Camilla glanced toward the courtyard where tourists were beginning to wander again, phones out, unaware of what had just occurred. The guard had resumed their posts. The ceremony had concluded. To them, everything looked normal. But she knew, and so did he. "This will be spoken of," she continued, voice sharper now. "I'll make sure of it." Lionel stopped at the edge of the stone arch. The wind tugged slightly at the hem of his scarlet tunic. His tall bearskin hat caught a glint of weak sunlight as he turned his head, not toward her, but toward the space just behind her, where Sovereign had stood before he was led away. "No, ma'am," he said quietly. "It will be remembered." She stepped forward. "You embarrassed me in front of my own security detail. Lionel didn't flinch. You accused me. I stopped you, he said. That's not the same. Camilla's voice rose slightly. You undermined a royal command. Which one? He said softly. The one written in ceremony, or the one written in blood? That silenced her for a breath. 2. I am the queen, she said. His eyes met hers now, not angry, not even righteous, just level, steady. No, he said. She was. And with that, Lionel stepped back toward the inner gate. But that's when the door behind Camilla opened. Not the car, not the castle entrance, but a side passage near the steward's wing. King Charles stood there. No crown, no sash, just a dark coat over a black wool suit, collar high, his expression unreadable. Camilla turned, startled. Charles! He raised one hand, not to greet her, to halt her words. Then his gaze shifted to Lionel, and with the smallest nod, not theatrical, not exaggerated, he confirmed it. You did right, Sergeant. Camilla's breath caught. From this day forward, the king continued, no one rides that horse. Not for sport, not for show, not for legacy. Lionel gave a slight bow, not low, not grovelling, just enough. Camilla stared at Charles, mouth parted in disbelief, but no protest left her lips. The king's final words were not to her, they were to Lionel. She trusted you with sovereign, he said, and now so do I. Then he turned and walked back inside. No fanfare, no explanation, just restoration. She thought she could ride legacy, but instead she was stopped by the very one meant to guard it. Now, before you go, do you think King Charles should have spoken sooner? Was Camilla's act just ignorance or something worse? And should the royal guard have the power to override royalty when legacy is at risk? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you believe some honours are too sacred to be touched, tap subscribe, turn on the bell icon, and share this story with someone who still remembers the Queen. Because sometimes the horse remembers too.